Close your eyes for a moment and imagine stepping onto the streets of New York. Not the New York of today, with its endless noise, but the New York of the early 1700s. Before we begin, let me ask you something. Are you from New York? If yes, then this journey is your journey. A look into what your very own city looked like 3 centuries ago. Share this video with your friends from New York and must subscribe our channel because this is their story too. And if you're not from New York, then I want you to tell me in the comments, which city are you from? Because one day we might walk through the past of your city as well. Now, let's walk together into the past. The year is around 1725. The island of Manhattan is still young, still rough around the edges. You step off a ship at the harbor and take your first steps onto the muddy, uneven streets. The first thing you notice is the smell, a mix of salt from the harbor, wood smoke from countless chimneys, fish drying in the sun, and the sharp tang of horses and livestock. It is not unpleasant. It is simply the smell of life. The soundscape is different too. Instead of car horns, you hear the creak of wooden carts, the clip-clop of hooves striking stone and mud, the distant cry of a seagull, the chatter of merchants calling out their prices. Children laugh in the distance, chasing one another with sticks and wooden hoops. The skyline is low, where today glass towers touch the clouds. In this century, nothing rises above 3 stories. Timber-framed houses lean slightly toward the street, their shutters painted in bright colors. Overhanging signs sway in the breeze. A painted boot for the cobbler, a tankard for the tavern, a loaf of bread for the baker. You begin to walk. The streets are narrow, twisting, almost like paths worn by cattle, because many of them began exactly that way. They were once trails, slowly beaten into roads by wagons and carts. At the heart of the town, the main street is filled with activity. Farmers bring in carts loaded with pumpkins, apples, and corn. Sailors wander ashore after weeks at sea, still swaying slightly as they walk. Everywhere, people are busy. Women in long dresses carry baskets filled with bread or milk jugs. Men in coats and tricorn hats argue about prices at the market. Children dart between adults, barefoot, their laughter echoing off the walls. Underfoot, the street is uneven. In dry weather, dust clings to your shoes. In rain, the mud can swallow them. Wooden planks are sometimes laid across the muck, creating makeshift sidewalks. On one corner stands a tavern. Its door swings open and out drifts the smell of ale, tobacco smoke, and roasted meat. Inside, sailors laugh, mugs clink, and a fiddler plays a tune in the corner. Taverns are not only places of drink, they are the very heart of New York's social life. Business deals are struck here, gossip is traded, and news from distant lands spreads faster than the ships that carried it. Across the street, a small bakery hums with activity. A woman pulls fresh loaves of bread from a brick oven, their crusts golden, their scent filling the air. Children peer through the window, noses pressed against the glass, hoping for a sweet treat. Nearby, a blacksmith hammers iron. Sparks fly as he shapes horseshoes and nails. The sound rings down the street like a heartbeat, steady and powerful. Every shop has its own music. The ringing of hammers, the chopping of wood, the laughter of customers. Together, they create the daily symphony of early New York. New York in this century is already a city of many peoples. Walk one block and you hear Dutch spoken. Walk another and you hear English, German, or French. African languages mix into the chorus, carried by enslaved men and women forced into labor. The faces are diverse. A Dutch merchant in a fine coat passes by, counting coins in his hand. An English sailor carries a rope over his shoulder, his clothes stained with salt. An African woman balances a basket on her head, selling vegetables at the market. A Jewish trader greets a friend near his shop. A German baker pulls a cart filled with bread. Already, New York is what it would one day be famous for: a mosaic of cultures, traditions, and languages. At the heart of the city is the market. Stalls line the square, covered with cloth awnings. Goods spill out in every direction. Barrels of cider, baskets of apples, sides of meat, jars of honey, bolts of cloth, hand-carved tools. Farmers shout their prices. Housewives argue for a better deal. Children tug at their mothers' skirts, begging for a sweet. Dogs dart through the crowd, tails wagging, scavenging for scraps. The air is thick with voices, the smell of food, and the feeling of life. This market is not only a place of commerce, it is where people meet, laugh, complain, and connect. But not every street is so lively. As you wander away from the market, you find narrow alleys. Here, the houses are smaller, the streets quieter. Laundry hangs from windows, swaying in the breeze. Chickens peck at the ground. A woman leans from her window to call her children inside. Life in these back streets is simple, sometimes harsh. Families crowd into 1 or 2 rooms. Servants and laborers rise before dawn and work until nightfall. But even here, there is warmth, the laughter of neighbors, the smell of stew simmering on a fire, the songs sung softly at the end of the day. Every street seems to lead back to the water. The harbor is the lifeblood of the city. Ships stand tall, their masts like forests of wood and rope. Sailors shout, merchants bargain. Crates are lifted by pulleys and rolled onto carts. The smell of tar, salt, and fish fills the air. Seagulls wheel overhead, crying for scraps. The water slaps against the docks in a steady rhythm. From here, goods travel into the city. Sugar, rum, tobacco, spices, silks, and from here, New York's own products, lumber, grain, furs, leave for faraway shores. The harbor is a place of wealth and power, but also of hardship. For every rich merchant counting coins, there are sailors sleeping on hard floors, laborers carrying heavy loads, and enslaved men and women forced to toil. As the day fades, lanterns are lit along the streets. The glow is soft, golden, casting long shadows across the ground. The noise quiets, taverns still hum, but families retreat into their homes. Children are tucked into beds beneath wool blankets. Fires burn low in the hearths. The streets, once alive with noise, are now hushed. The only sounds are the creak of wooden signs, the soft thud of hooves from a late rider, the whisper of wind through the alleys. And as you stand there, breathing in the smoky night air, you realize this is New York before the skyscrapers, before the subways, before the city of steel and glass. This is the city as it once was, a village grown into a town, filled with voices, stories, and dreams. The streets of old New York are gone now, paved over, built upon, replaced by avenues and towers. But if you close your eyes, if you listen in the quiet of the night, perhaps you can still hear them. The laughter of children with their hoops, The ringing of the blacksmith's hammer, the cry of a seagull at the harbor, and the voices of 1,000 lives lived 3 centuries ago. And so, the streets of New York remain alive, not in stone or timber, but in memory, waiting for us to walk them again in our imagination. If you were to walk away from the noise of the market square, away from the docks and the clamor of taverns, you would find yourself in the quiet neighborhoods of early New York. Here, down narrower streets and in small courtyards, families lived their daily lives. Tonight, we will step inside these homes, not as strangers, but as gentle visitors, observing the way people lived, worked, ate, and dreamed more than 300 years ago. Before we go in, let me ask you, if you live in New York today, can you imagine your own ancestors in such houses? Simple, wooden structures with no electricity, no running water, no glass towers reaching for the sky. If you are from another city, imagine your family in a small wooden home, in a world without technology, without the endless noise of modern life. This is how most of humanity lived for centuries, and now we return to it to learn what life felt like in a New York long vanished. The houses of early New York were humble but strong. They were made mostly of timber, some with stone foundations. Roofs were steep and often covered with wooden shingles. Windows were small, with shutters to keep out the cold wind in winter and to shade the rooms in summer. Inside, there were rarely more than 2 or 3 rooms. A main room served as the heart of the home, with a fireplace on one wall. The fire was everything. Heat in the winter, light in the evening, and the place where all meals were cooked. The furniture was simple, often handmade, a heavy wooden table, perhaps a few chairs, a chest for clothing, and straw-filled mattresses on wooden frames. Many families had only the bare essentials. For decoration, there might be a small religious text, a family Bible, or a piece of pottery placed carefully on a shelf. The floor was wood, sometimes swept, sometimes scattered with straw to keep it warm. The air was thick with the smell of smoke from the fire, the earthy scent of wood, and the faint aroma of whatever meal had last been cooked. Families were large. 6, 8, sometimes even 10 children shared these homes. Parents believed in big households, not only because of faith and tradition, but also because children meant help. Every small hand was needed for survival. Fathers were usually the providers. They worked as farmers, blacksmiths, carpenters, sailors, or merchants. Mothers managed the home. They cooked, baked, cleaned, sewed clothes, tended small gardens, and raised the children. Children began working almost as soon as they could walk. A boy might carry water, chop wood, or fetch goods from the market. A girl might help her mother knead bread, wash clothes, or care for her younger siblings. Childhood, as we know it today, did not really exist. Life was responsibility from the start. Yet, in the evenings, when the work was done, laughter filled the home. Parents told stories by the fire, children played simple games, and songs were sung softly in the flickering light. A typical day in one of these homes began before sunrise. The first sound was often the crackle of the fire being rekindled. Mothers rose early, wrapping shawls around their shoulders, stirring the coals, and setting pots of porridge to cook. Fathers stepped outside to fetch wood or to tend animals if they had them. Breakfast was plain: bread with butter, porridge, or perhaps milk. Children ate quickly, then hurried to their chores. Throughout the day, the house bustled with activity. A mother might bake bread in the brick oven, her hands white with flour. A daughter might sit near the window, sewing patches into clothes, while keeping an eye on her younger siblings. A son might be sent into the street to carry water from the well. The house was never silent. The sound of chopping wood, the clatter of dishes, the cries of infants, the barking of dogs, all mixed into a constant hum of domestic life. By evening, the family gathered again. Dinner might be salted meat, beans, or fish, with bread. Afterward, the fire burned low, and by its glow, stories were told, prayers were said, and sleep came early. Sleeping was a communal affair. Large families often shared beds. Parents slept in one room, with younger children crowded beside them. Older children might sleep in lofts above the main room, their straw mattresses spread on the floorboards. Blankets were heavy, made of wool. The fire provided warmth, but on cold winter nights, the house still grew icy. Children huddled together for warmth, whispering softly to one another before drifting into sleep. There was no privacy, no separation. The family was one unit, living close together, breathing the same air, sharing every sound of the night. The roles within the home were distinct but balanced by necessity. Men were seen as providers, but women's work was just as critical. Without mothers managing the household, cooking meals and raising children, survival would have been impossible. Women rose before dawn and often worked until long after sunset. They kneaded dough, churned butter, mended clothes, and soothed crying infants, all while keeping the fire alive. Their labor was invisible to outsiders, but it was the backbone of the family. Children followed the paths of their parents. Boys often learned their father's trade, while girls learned the skills of their mothers. It was a cycle, passed down generation after generation. What was it like, emotionally, to live in these homes? There was hardship, yes. Poverty was common. Illness could sweep through a household and take children before they grew. Winters were long and harsh. Summers brought heat, flies, and sickness. But there was also warmth, not from luxury, but from togetherness. Families depended on one another. A home was not only walls and a roof. It was a circle of people who shared everything: food, work, joy, and grief. Around the fire at night, fathers told stories of their youth. Mothers taught songs to their daughters. Children played with wooden toys carved by hand. These were small joys, but they were enough. Picture the family preparing for sleep. The fire has burned low. Shadows dance across the walls. The air is thick with smoke and the faint smell of stew. Children whisper as they curl beneath wool blankets. Outside, the distant creak of wagons fades into silence. The harbor is quiet, save for the soft lap of water against wood. A dog barks once, then all is still. Inside, the only sound is the steady breathing of a dozen souls, bound together by love, duty, and the simple struggle to endure. Homes and families were the heart of old New York. They were not grand, they were not rich, but they were alive. Within their wooden walls, generations were born, raised, and lost. Within those rooms, laughter echoed, tears were shed, prayers were whispered. 300 years later, those houses are gone. Skyscrapers rise, where once stood humble timber homes. But the families that lived there are still with us, not in their houses, but in their descendants, in their stories, in the living pulse of New York itself. So when you walk through the streets today, remember, beneath your feet are the ghosts of 1,000 homes and the families who filled them with life. Before we begin tonight's journey, let me ask you something. When you think of New York today, what foods come to mind? Maybe pizza by the slice, bagels with cream cheese, or a hot dog from a street cart. Perhaps it's the smell of roasted nuts in Times Square, or the rich flavors of food from every corner of the world. Now imagine this city 300 years ago. No pizza, no bagels, no skyscraper cafes or neon-lit diners. Instead, simple kitchens, smoky fires, wooden tables, and meals cooked slowly, carefully, with whatever the land and sea could offer. If you are from New York, share this story with your friends. If you are from another city, tell me in the comments, what is the food your ancestors might have eaten 3 centuries ago? Now, let us step back in time, into the kitchens, markets, and taverns of old New York. The day began early, often before the first light of dawn. The mother of the house rose first, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders, and stirred the embers of the fire back to life. Into an iron pot, she poured oats or cornmeal, mixed with water or milk, and slowly stirred until the porridge thickened. Children rubbed their eyes and crept from their beds. Fathers laced their boots, preparing for the day's work. The smell of warm porridge filled the air, earthy and comforting. Breakfast was plain, but steady. Bread spread with butter, porridge sweetened with honey, if the family was lucky, or a simple mug of milk. For poorer families, sometimes only bread dipped in water or cider. There were no sugary cereals, no fried eggs on shiny plates, only humble food, enough to fuel a day of labor. Yet, sitting together, sharing from the same pot, gave families a quiet strength. As the sun rose higher, the marketplace came alive. Farmers brought carts loaded with pumpkins, apples, and corn. Fishermen laid out their catch. Gleaming fish, oysters, and clams pulled fresh from nearby waters. Stalls offered cheeses, butter, and eggs. Bakers sold round loaves with golden crusts, still warm from their ovens. The smell of fresh bread drifted down the streets, mingling with the scent of herbs, spices, and salted meat. Merchants shouted their prices. Housewives argued for better deals. Children tugged at their mothers' skirts, begging for sweet treats, like gingerbread or sugared nuts. Dogs nosed the ground for scraps, tails wagging. The market was not only a place of trade, it was a theater of life. Here, news was exchanged, gossip spread, friendships strengthened. Food connected people, not just by taste, but by community. In the kitchens of old New York, meals were slow and smoky. There were no stoves, no ovens as we know them. Instead, the hearth, the open fire, was the heart of the home. Meat was hung over the flames, or stewed in heavy iron pots. Vegetables simmered for hours, bread baked in brick ovens or iron pans. The air inside the house was thick with smoke, clinging to clothes, hair, and walls. Common meals included salted pork, beef, or fish, often preserved in barrels. Beans and corn were staples. Potatoes, onions, and cabbage filled the table when in season. Milk was drunk fresh or turned into butter and cheese. Spices were rare and expensive, but those who could afford them added cinnamon to porridge, pepper to meat, or nutmeg to cider. For the poor, salt was the main flavoring, precious but necessary. Every meal took effort. Firewood had to be gathered, water carried, meat salted, grain ground. Cooking was not convenience, it was labor. At noon, families paused for their main meal. Fathers returned from work if they could, children from chores, mothers from the market. Together, they sat at the heavy wooden table. On the table might be a pot of stew, meat, beans, and vegetables simmered together, or perhaps fish fried in a pan, served with bread. If the family was well off, a pie filled with meat, apples, or berries might appear. There was no silverware for everyone. Wooden spoons, knives, and fingers were common. Food was shared from common dishes. The sound of chewing, laughter, and chatter filled the room. For many families, this meal was the one true moment of rest in the day. To sit, to talk, to eat slowly. For those who did not eat at home, there were taverns and street vendors. Taverns served thick stews, bread, cheese, and ale. Sailors, merchants, and travelers gathered there, eating heartily, drinking deeply, telling stories of the sea. The air was heavy with smoke, loud with voices, filled with the sound of mugs clinking together. Street vendors offered roasted nuts, hot pies, or mugs of cider. A child might spend a single coin on a sweet cake, savoring each bite as if it were treasure. Food was not only about survival, it was about comfort, about joy, about the simple happiness of flavor. As the sun began to set, the evening meal was lighter, but no less important. Families gathered again around the fire, perhaps bread and cheese, perhaps a small pot of soup, perhaps leftovers from midday. The glow of the fire lit their faces. The day's work was discussed. Children dozed at the table. Mothers tucked them into bed afterward, their bellies full, their hearts content. Even the poorest meal, eaten together, became an anchor of the family. Food in old New York changed with the seasons. In autumn, markets overflowed with apples, pumpkins, squash, and nuts. In winter, meals grew heavy with salted meats, stews, and bread. Spring brought greens, herbs, and fresh milk. Summer offered berries, corn, and fish. Families preserved what they could, pickling vegetables, drying fruit, salting fish, smoking meat. A well-prepared household could survive the long winter by carefully storing food. A poorly prepared one might face hunger. Water was not always safe. People often drank cider, ale, or beer. Even children in small amounts. Cider was the drink of choice, sweet, strong, and filling. At taverns, rum was popular, imported from the Caribbean. Strong drink warmed the body, dulled hardship, and fueled both joy and sorrow. Food was never just private. Neighbors shared what they had. A loaf of bread, a jug of milk, a pot of stew could be passed across fences. At church gatherings, after services, families shared meals outdoors. At markets, food connected strangers. At taverns, it built friendships, alliances, even rivalries. To eat was to be human. To share food was to be a New Yorker. As darkness fell over the city, the smell of food lingered in the air. Roasted meat, baked bread, sweet cider, smoky fires. Families settled into sleep, their bodies warm, their bellies filled, their spirits at rest. The city grew quiet, but the memory of meals, the taste of bread, the laughter at the table, The comfort of stew stayed alive in every heart. Food and daily life were simple, yes, but they were also sacred. In every loaf of bread, in every pot of stew, there was love, labor, and life itself. New York today is a city of endless flavors, but 300 years ago, it was still learning the basics: how to cook, how to share, how to survive. And in that survival, in that simple daily bread, the foundation of the great city was laid. Close your eyes now and imagine yourself at that wooden table, a mug of cider in your hand, bread still warm from the oven before you. Hear the laughter of children, the crackle of the fire, the soft voice of a mother humming a tune. Before we open the doors to the workplaces of old New York, let me ask you something. What is your work today? Do you spend your hours in an office, on a computer, behind a counter, or maybe driving through crowded streets? Now, imagine your day transformed. No electricity, no computers, no phones, not even gas lamps to guide you. 300 years ago, the people of New York still worked from sunrise to sunset, but their tasks were different. Harder in many ways, simpler in others. Work was survival. Every trade mattered. Every hand contributed, and every occupation, no matter how humble, stitched together the life of the city. If you are from New York, share this story with your friends and think, perhaps your ancestors once held these very jobs. If you are from another city, tell me in the comments, what work might your people have done centuries ago? Now, let us step into the workshops, the docks, the shops, and the fields of old New York. The harbor was the lifeblood of the city, and the first place to see work in its rawest form. From dawn, sailors shouted as ships pulled in, their sails heavy with wind, and their decks heavy with goods. Ropes slapped against wooden posts, gulls wheeled overhead, and the air was alive with the smell of tar, salt, and sweat. Sailors carried crates of sugar, rum, tobacco, and spices. Others rolled barrels onto carts, their backs bent beneath the weight. Some prepared ropes and sails for the next voyage. Work on the docks was dangerous. A single slip could send a man tumbling into the icy water. A misstep could crush a foot beneath a rolling barrel. Yet men returned, day after day, because the sea was both enemy and provider. Sailors were rough men, their hands calloused, their faces burned by wind and salt. They drank hard, laughed loudly, and carried the stories of faraway lands. Their work was exhausting, but it bound New York to the world beyond. If the sailors carried goods, the merchants turned them into wealth. Picture a man in a fine coat, standing at the docks with a ledger in hand. He watches as crates are unloaded, making careful notes, counting every barrel. Merchants bargained fiercely, sugar from the Caribbean, furs from the frontier, timber from the forests. All passed through their hands. They loaned money, struck deals, and built fortunes, coin by coin. Some became rich, their names remembered in the city's history, but many more were small traders, selling cloth, spices, or tools in crowded markets. They stood in stalls, their voices hoarse from shouting, their fingers stained from counting coins. Merchants worked not with muscle, but with wit, with risk, with endless calculation. Their work shaped the city's rise as a place of trade. Step into a blacksmith's shop, and the first thing you feel is the heat. A fire roars in the forge, glowing orange and white. The blacksmith's hammer rises and falls, striking metal with a rhythm that echoes through the street. Sparks leap into the air, filling the shop with flashes of light. Horses wait outside, their hooves clattering, as the blacksmith shapes iron into shoes. Farmers wait for nails, hinges, and tools. Sailors need anchors repaired, chains reforged. The blacksmith's body is strong, his arms thick from endless hammering. Sweat pours down his face, his clothes darkened with soot. But without his work, ships could not sail, doors could not close, wagons could not roll. His hammer is the heartbeat of the city, steady and strong. Everywhere, buildings were rising. Homes, taverns, warehouses, churches. Carpenters worked with saws, hammers, and planes, shaping wood into beams, planks, and frames. They built houses with low ceilings and small windows, strong enough to withstand storms. They repaired docks battered by waves. They carved furniture, tables, chairs, chests, simple, sturdy, built to last. Their work filled the air with the smell of fresh wood, the sound of saws biting into timber. Carpenters were respected, for they built the very bones of the city. Not all work was heavy. Some required patience and detail. In small workshops, shoemakers cut leather into soles and stitched boots with careful hands. Their benches were cluttered with tools, their windows filled with shoes in every size. Tailors sat by candlelight, needles flashing in the dim glow. They cut cloth into coats, dresses, and breeches. Rich merchants wanted fine clothes of imported fabric, while poor laborers asked only for sturdy garments. Both shoemakers and tailors worked long hours, their eyes strained, their fingers pricked, but their craft kept the city walking, kept the people dressed. Inside the homes, women's work was constant. They churned butter, baked bread, sewed clothes, tended gardens, and raised children. They fetched water, scrubbed floors, and mended everything broken. For many, this work was invisible, not counted, not praised, but it was the foundation of life. Without women's labor, families could not survive. Some women also sold goods at markets, ran taverns, or worked as midwives. Their earnings helped sustain households. Others, in poorer families, worked as servants in wealthier homes, cleaning, cooking, and caring for children, not their own. Women's work was endless, but it was also essential. There was no childhood as we know it. By the age of 5 or 6, children had chores. Boys carried water, chopped wood, or ran errands. Girls helped with cooking, cleaning, and sewing. By their teens, many worked like adults. Apprentices learned trades under masters: blacksmithing, carpentry, tailoring. Girls prepared for marriage, learning every skill their mothers could teach. There was play, yes, but work always came first. Childhood was short because survival could not wait. Not all work was free. Many families employed servants, young men and women who lived in their houses, doing chores from dawn to dusk. They were fed and given shelter, but their lives were hard, their freedom limited. Worse still, slavery was part of old New York. Enslaved Africans were forced to work in homes, on docks, and in fields. They cooked, cleaned, carried, and built, their labor stolen, their lives bound in chains. Their work was the most painful of all, and though history often ignored them, their hands shaped much of the city's growth. Their stories deserve to be remembered, even in whispers. Work began at sunrise, the streets filled with movement, carts rolling, hammers ringing, voices shouting. All through the day, the city hummed with labor. At midday, workers paused to eat, then returned to their tasks. The blacksmith hammered, the sailor hauled, the merchant bargained, the mother baked, the tailor stitched. By sunset, the city slowed, shops closed, taverns filled, families ate together, workers rested their bodies. The sound of labor faded into silence, replaced by the quiet breath of sleep. 300 years ago, every job mattered. There were no offices, no stock markets, no skyscraper corporations. Work was physical, immediate, visible. Without the sailor, the city starved. Without the blacksmith, wagons stopped. Without the mother, the family could not survive. Work was not glamorous, but it gave dignity. Every hammer strike, every loaf of bread, every stitched boot was a piece of New York's foundation. So when you think of your own work today, remember, the city was built not by towers, but by hands. Hands that hammered, carried, cooked, and stitched. Hands that shaped a future they could not yet see. Close your eyes now and imagine the rhythm of those hands, the steady beat of labor echoing softly through time. Imagine yourself in New York 3 centuries ago. The work of the day is finished. The sailors have left the docks. The blacksmith's hammer is silent. The baker's fire has cooled. The city exhales, the tension of survival loosening into something softer. But what did people do when their work was done? How did they find joy, laughter, and rest in a world without electricity, without theaters, without glowing screens? Tonight, we will step into the evenings of old New York and see how men, women, and children found entertainment and leisure in a city that was still small, still young, but already full of life. If you are from New York, share this story with your friends. Perhaps your ancestors once played these same games, told these same stories. If you are from another city, tell me in the comments, how did your ancestors find joy centuries ago? Now, let's begin. The tavern was more than a place to drink. It was the beating heart of social life in old New York. Picture a low wooden building, warm light spilling through its windows into the night. Inside, the air is thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of ale. The sound of laughter and shouting fills the room. Men sit at heavy wooden tables, mugs clinking, voices rising in argument, gossip, and song. Sailors tell stories of faraway lands. Merchants bargain, even while they drink. Their voices sharp, their coins loud upon the table. Farmers, tired from the fields, find rest in strong cider. A fiddler plays in the corner, the bow skipping across the strings, feet tapping in time. In taverns, politics were debated, news from England discussed, and rumors of rebellion whispered. But more than that, taverns gave people escape, a chance to forget work, to laugh, to drink, to belong. Music was simple but constant. Fiddles, flutes, and drums carried tunes into the night. At taverns, in homes, and at fairs, people danced. The dances were not elegant ballroom steps, but lively reels and jigs. Men and women moved in circles, clapping their hands, stomping their feet, laughing as they spun. Children joined in, their laughter mixing with the music. Even in small homes, music was part of life. A father might play a tune on a fiddle by the fire. A mother might sing softly while rocking a baby. Songs carried stories of love, of labor, of sorrow, of hope. Not every evening was noisy. In many homes, leisure meant gathering quietly around the hearth. The fire crackled. Shadows danced across the walls. Children listened wide-eyed as their parents told stories. Some were tales from the old world, Dutch legends, English fairy stories, African folk tales carried across the sea. Others were local, stories of hunters, of ghosts wandering the forests, of strange sounds heard near the harbor at night. Storytelling was not just entertainment, it was memory, identity, a way to carry culture forward. Around the fire, children learned who they were and where they came from. During the day, even in the midst of chores, children played. Their toys were simple: carved wooden dolls, marbles, hoops rolled along the street with sticks, balls made from leather scraps. Games of tag and hide and seek filled the alleys. Boys played at soldiers, sticks in hand, pretending to fight battles. Girls played house, mimicking their mothers, cooking pretend meals from leaves and mud. At night, children played quietly indoors. They whispered secrets, shared riddles, and laughed softly before sleep. For them, even the simplest objects, a stick, a hoop, a marble, became treasure. Several times a year, the city hosted fairs and markets that doubled as entertainment. Farmers brought livestock, merchants sold goods, and musicians played in the open air. Stalls overflowed with pies, roasted nuts, and cider. Jugglers, performers, and storytellers entertained crowds. Neighbors met, gossiped, and celebrated. For many, these fairs were the highlight of the year. A break from labor, a chance to feel joy. Children ran freely, tasting sweets they rarely had at home. Adults laughed with friends, played games of chance, or danced under the sky. For many, Sunday was both a day of worship and a day of community. After church services, families lingered outdoors, sharing food, catching up on news, and enjoying one another's company. The church itself was a kind of gathering place where people not only prayed, but also saw friends, shared stories, and found relief from the isolation of daily labor. In taverns and private homes, men often played cards, dice, or board games like drafts. Coins passed back and forth, arguments flared, and laughter followed. Though some frowned upon gambling, it was popular. For many, a game of cards was not about money, but about pride, luck, and the thrill of chance. Not all leisure was noisy or shared. Some found joy in reading. Books were rare and expensive, but those who had them cherished every page. Families often read aloud by candlelight, children listening with wide eyes. Others wrote letters, carefully crafting words with ink and quill. Writing was slow, deliberate, but it was a way to connect with distant family and friends. Some simply sat in silence, gazing into the fire, letting their thoughts drift. Leisure could be as simple as rest, rare, precious, deeply human. As night deepened, the city softened, the noise of the day faded. From taverns came faint music and laughter. From homes came the quiet hum of lullabies. The streets grew still, lanterns flickering in the wind. Somewhere a dog barked, somewhere a sailor sang a rough tune. But for most, night meant rest. Entertainment was finished, leisure was done, and the city slept. Entertainment and leisure in old New York were simple, but they were vital. They gave people joy, rest, and connection in a world that was often harsh. A mug of cider, a fiddle tune, a story by the fire, These were the small treasures of life, and in them, people found strength to face another day. So when you think of entertainment today, theaters, concerts, screens glowing in the night, remember, 300 years ago, joy came from simpler things, from laughter, from stories, from music, from togetherness. The politics of old New York. Have you ever sat in a meeting, a debate, or a courtroom and felt the weight of decisions being made? Imagine the same feeling 300 years ago, when the city was still young, when its laws and leadership were still finding their shape. If you are from New York, share this story with your friends, because the political roots of your city are here, in these very streets. If you are from another city, tell me in the comments, what kind of power shaped your home centuries ago? Now, let us step into the chambers, the courts, and the whispers of politics in colonial New York. At the top of the political ladder stood the governor, appointed by the British Crown. He was the king's voice in the colony, clothed in authority, backed by soldiers, and housed in comfort. The governor controlled taxes, trade, and laws. He commanded troops, approved or rejected new rules, and settled disputes between merchants and landowners. To many, he seemed untouchable, a man whose decisions shaped the life of every citizen. But even the governor was not beyond criticism. In taverns and marketplaces, men muttered against him. Too many taxes, they complained. Too much power. The seeds of discontent were already being planted, though rebellion was still decades away. Beneath the governor, local councils and assemblies tried to give voice to the people. Wealthy landowners and merchants gathered in wooden halls, their voices rising in debate. They argued about trade regulations, property disputes, and the endless question of taxes. Imagine the scene. Men in wigs and coats, sitting on wooden benches, quills scratching across parchment, as clerks recorded every word. The air is thick with smoke from candles, the smell of ink sharp in the room. Outside, the people wait, curious, but excluded. Their voices filtered through the power of the few. Though these assemblies gave the illusion of representation, they were limited. Only certain men, property owners, wealthy enough to matter, could truly influence decisions. The poor, the enslaved, women and children had no voice in politics at all. Step inside a courtroom. The judge sits high, robed in authority. Lawyers present their cases, their voices formal and sharp. Juries, made of local men, listen closely, weighing guilt and innocence. Cases ranged from theft and property disputes to violent crimes. A man accused of stealing might be fined or placed in the stocks. A woman accused of slander might be publicly shamed. More serious crimes brought harsher punishment, even death. The courtroom was not only a place of law, but also of spectacle. Crowds gathered to watch trials, to whisper about the accused, to see justice unfold. For many, it was the closest they would ever come to politics. Politics was not separate from religion. Churches influenced decisions, shaping morals and guiding laws. Clergy preached about obedience, duty, and the authority of rulers. On Sundays, sermons often touched on politics, wrapped in the language of faith. The church's voice was strong, reminding the people of their place in a world shaped by God and King. Not all power was official. Merchants, with their wealth and influence, shaped politics behind the scenes. A well-placed bribe a favor, or a whispered threat could sway decisions. Trade was the lifeblood of New York, and those who controlled it often had more influence than governors or councils. Ships brought wealth, and wealth brought power. The city's politics were already tied tightly to commerce, a pattern that would only grow stronger in centuries to come. And what of the ordinary people, the sailors, the bakers, the mothers, the children? Their voices were rarely heard in council halls or courtrooms. Their lives were shaped by laws they could not write, taxes they could not fight, and rulers they did not choose. Yet their whispers mattered. In taverns, in markets, in homes, people talked. They shared frustration, anger, hope. These quiet conversations, repeated across the city, were the first sparks of something greater, the spirit of resistance, the dream of freedom. By the early 1700s, most New Yorkers still accepted British rule, but beneath the surface, something was changing. The people were learning to question authority, to demand a say, to resist. Merchants complained of trade restrictions. Farmers grumbled about taxes. Families resented the governor's power. Pamphlets and newspapers began to carry bold words, pushing against the limits of control. The full revolution was still far away, but the roots were already in the soil. At the end of the day, politics did not vanish. In taverns, men debated over mugs of ale. In homes, families discussed rumors of new laws. By candlelight, pamphlets were read aloud, their words stirring both fear and hope. The city slept, but its mind remained restless, filled with questions about power, freedom, and the future. 300 years ago, politics in New York was not democracy as we know it today. It was a system of power, controlled by a few, watched by many, and resented by most. Yet in those council chambers, those courtrooms, those whispered tavern conversations, the spirit of New York was already forming. A spirit that questioned authority, demanded justice, and dreamed of a freer tomorrow. So when you think of politics today, the debates, the protests, the endless arguments, remember, this is not new. The struggle for power, the fight for justice, the dream of freedom, it has always been part of New York. Close your eyes and listen. What do you hear? Not the honk of cars, not the rush of subways, not the hum of neon lights. Instead, the creak of wooden ships, the cry of gulls, the splash of oars in the water. This is the harbor of New York, 3 centuries ago. If you are from New York, share this story with your friends, because this harbor is the reason your city became what it is today. If you are from another city, tell me in the comments, was your home once shaped by trade, by ships, by markets? Tonight, we step onto the docks of old New York to see the lifeline of the city, its harbor, its ships, its trade. The harbor stretched wide, calm but alive. Dozens of ships, their tall masts like forests of wood, rocked gently on the waves. Some had come from England, carrying goods across the Atlantic. Others had sailed up from the Caribbean, heavy with sugar and rum. Still others came from the colonies to the north and south, bringing furs, grain, and timber. The smell was overwhelming. Salt from the sea, tar from the ropes, smoke from nearby fires, fish drying in the sun, and the sweat of men at work. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp, diving at scraps left along the docks. The sound of ropes tightening, sails flapping, barrels rolling, and men shouting filled the air. The harbor was not quiet. It was a living thing, restless, pulsing, never still. From dawn until dusk, The docks were filled with labor. Sailors, their faces darkened by wind and salt, hauled crates onto land. Dock workers rolled barrels across wooden planks, their muscles straining. Merchants stood nearby, ledgers in hand, counting every item, arguing over prices. Barrels of sugar, tobacco, and rum thudded onto the docks. Crates of spices, silks, and glass clinked as they were lowered carefully. Bundles of furs, still smelling of the wilderness, arrived from the frontier. Timber, rough and heavy, came down from the forests of the north. The harbor was more than a place of ships. It was the mouth of the city, swallowing goods from across the world and spitting them into New York's streets. Sailors were a world of their own, rough men, scarred by storms, their hands thick with calluses, their clothes torn and patched. They shouted in accents from across the seas, English, Dutch, French, African tongues, and more. When they came ashore, they drank hard, laughed loudly, and filled the taverns with songs and fights. But on the docks, they worked without rest. They climbed ropes like spiders, balanced on beams high above the water, and braved storms that could kill without warning. Sailors were poor, often cheated of their pay, often broken by the sea. Yet without them, New York would have been nothing. If sailors carried the city's lifeblood, merchants controlled its flow. Picture a man in a fine coat, a quill behind his ear, his hands stained with ink instead of salt. He stands at the dock, watching goods arrive, making notes in his ledger, counting coins. Merchants were powerful. They financed voyages, bought goods, and sold them at profit. They built warehouses along the harbor, storing sugar, tobacco, rum, and grain. Their wealth grew with every ship that docked. Some were honest, but many were cunning. A well-timed bribe could secure a better deal. A whispered word to a governor could change a law. Behind the scenes, merchants wielded more influence than most officials. The harbor was their kingdom, and trade was their crown. From the docks, goods flowed into the city's markets. Picture barrels rolling through muddy streets, carried on wagons. At the market square, stalls overflowed with imported luxuries: molasses, spices, cloth, glass bottles, even tea. Ordinary people could not afford much, but the sight of these goods filled the city with wonder. A child stared at a jar of sugar, its crystal sparkling like jewels. A mother touched a bolt of cloth, softer than anything she had known. A father dreamed of rum, warming him through winter nights. Trade connected the city to the wider world. Every market stall whispered of lands beyond the sea. Behind the noise of trade, shipbuilders worked endlessly. Along the shore, wooden frames of new ships rose like skeletons against the sky. Men sawed planks, hammered nails, sealed seams with tar and pitch. Building a ship was hard, dangerous work, but it was also pride. Every vessel that sailed carried New York's name into the world. Shipbuilders were craftsmen, shaping not just wood, but the destiny of the city. But not all trade was noble. Among the barrels of sugar and rum, there were chains. Ships brought enslaved men, women, and children from Africa. They were sold in markets, their lives reduced to property, their labor forced into homes, docks, and fields. This too was part of New York's harbor. Behind the wealth of merchants and the comfort of families lay the suffering of those who had no freedom. Their footsteps, their tears, their strength built much of the city. though history often forgot them. The harbor carried wealth, but it also carried pain. From sunrise, the harbor roared with life, ships arriving, ropes creaking, gulls crying, men shouting. The noise was constant, the work never ending. At midday, workers ate quickly, bread, cheese, cider, then returned to labor. By evening, the docks slowed, ships anchored for the night, men staggered into taverns, and the water lapped softly against the wood. By moonlight, the harbor rested, its ships like shadows, its ropes swaying in the breeze. The silence was brief, for with dawn, the cycle began again. The harbor was not just a place, it was the heart of New York. The reason it grew, the reason it thrived. Every crate, every barrel, every sail carried the city forward. Today, New York is a city of glass towers and endless traffic, but its soul was born here, on the docks, in the sails, in the trade that bound it to the world. So when you think of New York, remember the harbor, remember the sailors, the merchants, the shipbuilders, the enslaved. Remember the sound of waves against wood, the smell of tar and salt, the cry of gulls overhead. When people imagine history, they often see kings and governors, soldiers and merchants, the powerful, the wealthy, the ones whose names survived in books. But beneath their shadows lived thousands of others whose stories were quieter, softer, often forgotten. Tonight, we will walk through the hidden alleys of old New York. We will listen to the whispers of immigrants, the songs of the enslaved, the prayers of servants, the laughter of children in cramped streets. If you are from New York, share this with your friends, because your city was not only built by leaders, but by ordinary people whose names history rarely recorded. And if you are from another city, tell me in the comments, do you think your own city hides stories like these? Now, let's step into the hidden side of New York. 300 years ago, New York was already a city of many languages: Dutch, English, German, French, and African tongues mixed in the air like music. Walk one street, and you might hear a baker calling out in German. Turn a corner, and a Dutch merchant haggles over prices. Down another lane, an English sailor sings a tune, his voice rough from salt and rum. Immigrants lived close together, their homes small, their work hard. They brought recipes, songs, and traditions from their homelands, blending them into the fabric of the city. Each culture left a mark, shaping New York into a place unlike any other. Many families could not survive without servants. Young men and women, often poor or orphaned, worked in wealthy homes. They rose before dawn, fetched water, lit fires, scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and cared for children not their own. They ate after their masters, slept in small rooms or lofts, and were often treated harshly. Their names were rarely written down, yet their labor kept households alive. Imagine a servant girl carrying heavy buckets of water up steep stairs, her arms trembling, her feet cold. Imagine a boy polishing boots by candlelight, listening to the family laugh in the room he could not enter. These were the hidden lives of the city. The harshest stories belonged to those enslaved. In old New York, slavery was real. Men, women, and children were bought and sold, their lives controlled by others. They worked in fields, on docks, and in homes. They cooked, cleaned, carried, and built, with no freedom of their own. An African woman might rise before dawn to prepare bread for a family that owned her. An African man might haul timber for ships, his back bent beneath the load. Children too young to labor were still expected to serve, their futures stolen before they began. Yet even in chains, they carried songs, stories, and strength. In whispered prayers, in quiet songs at night, they held on to hope. Their lives shaped New York in ways history often tried to forget. But their legacy lives in every street, every stone, every shadow. Not everyone in New York was wealthy. Many families lived in cramped wooden houses, sharing rooms with neighbors, sleeping several to a bed. Fathers worked long hours for little pay. Mothers sold bread or vegetables to make ends meet. Children often went hungry, their clothes patched and thin. Winters were harsh. Cold winds crept through the walls. Fires burned low, and sickness spread quickly. But even in poverty, there was resilience. Families leaned on one another. Neighbors shared food when they could. Laughter still echoed in alleys. Children still played. Mothers still sang to their babies by the fire. Women's voices were rarely heard in politics or books, but their strength filled the city. They managed homes, bore children, cooked meals, sewed clothes, and healed the sick. Some ran taverns or shops, working beside their husbands or alone if widowed. Midwives helped mothers give birth, their hands guiding new life into the world. Healers mixed herbs for fevers, using knowledge passed down through generations. Women's names may be missing from history, but their touch was everywhere. In every loaf of bread, every stitched shirt, every lullaby sung in the night. Children's voices were soft, but they carried the weight of the future. They worked, yes, but they also played, dreamed, and hoped. A boy chasing a hoop down the street might one day become a sailor. A girl sewing by candlelight might one day raise a family of her own. Some children never reached adulthood. Sickness, accidents, and hunger took many lives. Yet those who survived grew strong, carrying the lessons of hardship into the future. In hidden corners, people gathered to pray, sing, and share stories. Quakers, Jews, Anglicans, and other groups practiced their faith, often in small, humble spaces. For immigrants and the poor, faith was comfort. It gave hope in suffering, strength in weakness, and community in loneliness. A candlelit prayer meeting, a whispered song, a shared meal after worship. These quiet moments bound people together, giving them courage to face another day. The powerful had books and records, but the poor and the enslaved left only whispers. Stories passed by, word of mouth, fading with time. A lullaby sung by a mother to her child, a joke told by a sailor on the docks, a tale whispered by an African elder to keep memory alive, a letter never sent, a diary never kept, a dream never written. These were the hidden stories of New York. They may not fill history books, but they filled the city itself. At night, the city grew quiet, taverns glowed, but in back streets, poor families huddled close in the dark. Servants lay exhausted, dreaming of freedom. Enslaved men and women whispered prayers under their breath. The city slept, but its hidden stories breathed in the silence. Stories of pain, of struggle, of laughter, of survival. 300 years ago, New York was not only merchants and governors, but servants and slaves, mothers and children, immigrants and laborers. Their names are gone, but their lives built the city, brick by brick, heartbeat by heartbeat. So when you walk New York's streets today, remember, beneath the towers and lights lie the hidden stories of the forgotten. And if you listen closely, in the quiet of night, you may still hear them, the whispers of the past, asking not to be forgotten. Close your eyes and imagine the city of New York, not in the light of day, but under the cloak of night. 300 years ago, there are no neon signs, no glowing windows high above the streets, no endless traffic lighting the avenues. The city is small, quiet, fragile. The day's work is done, and the night has taken hold. If you are from New York, share this with your friends. Perhaps your ancestors once walked these same streets at night. If you are from another city, tell me in the comments, how do you imagine your home looked in darkness centuries ago? Now, let us walk together through the night of old New York. As the sun sets, shadows stretch long across the streets. The muddy lanes turn dim. The wooden houses cast into silhouettes. Families finish their meals. Fires burn lower, and the last sounds of work fade away. The city has no electric glow, no street lamps blazing into the night. Instead, a few lanterns flicker on doorways, their flames trembling in the breeze. Their light reaches only a few steps, leaving much of the street swallowed in darkness. The night is quiet, but not silent. Somewhere a dog barks, a horse snorts in its stable. The harbor creaks with the rhythm of water against wood. The city is alive, but it whispers now. Instead of shouting, step inside a home. The family has gathered near the hearth, the fire still glowing. Parents sit close, speaking softly, while children curl beneath heavy wool blankets. A mother hums a lullaby, her voice low and gentle. A father tells a story, his words drifting slowly into the ears of his children. The air smells of smoke, bread, and stew. Shadows flicker against the walls. The day's exhaustion fades into calm. Soon, the fire will be covered with ash to preserve its heat, and the house will sleep. Privacy is rare. Everyone sleeps close together. The sound of breathing fills the room. Steady, warm, human. Outside, the streets are dim. A lone lantern swings gently from a post, its light dancing in the wind. The mud glistens faintly. The stones shine with dampness. A rider passes, his horse's hooves echoing in the stillness. The sound is sharp, then gone. A sailor stumbles home from a tavern, singing a tune too loud for the hour. His voice echoes, then fades. The city is not safe at night. Shadows hide dangers. Thieves sometimes lurk in alleys, their eyes watching, their feet silent. To walk after dark is to walk carefully, your ears sharp, your hand close to your knife or cane. But most stay indoors, trusting the night to itself. Down by the water, the harbor rests. Ships sway gently, their sails furled, their masts creaking softly. The water slaps against the docks with a slow rhythm, like breathing. Sailors sleep in hammocks aboard ships. The scent of tar and salt thicken the air. Some sit awake, staring at the stars above, whispering to themselves, or writing letters by lantern light. The harbor at night is both peaceful and eerie. The darkness hides its noise, leaving only the slow lap of waves and the faint cry of gulls, too restless to sleep. While the city grows quiet, the taverns grow loud. Inside, candles and lanterns glow, casting golden light on wooden tables. Men laugh, mugs clink, fiddles play, dice roll across tables, cards are slapped down, coins exchanged with shouts of victory or groans of loss. The air is heavy with smoke and ale. Songs rise, rough and spirited, sometimes mournful, sometimes wild. For sailors and workers, this is escape. For merchants, it is business disguised as leisure. For thieves, it is opportunity. The tavern never truly sleeps. To keep the night safe, watchmen patrol the streets. Their lanterns swing as they walk, their staffs tapping the ground. They call out the hours, their voices carrying through the silence. 10 o'clock, all's well, but all is not always well. Fires are feared above all. A single spark could consume wooden homes in moments. Watchmen keep their eyes sharp for smoke, their ears tuned to any cry of alarm. They also guard against crime. Though their reach is limited, still, their presence gives comfort to those who lie awake, listening to the city breathe. Listen closely. What do you hear? The distant hum of a tavern song, the soft creak of a ship's mast, the whisper of wind through shutters, the rustle of rats in the alleys, the muffled cough of a child in bed. The night in old New York is alive with small sounds, intimate, human, fragile. As families sleep, they dream. A sailor dreams of the sea, of storms and horizons. A merchant dreams of coins and ships. A mother dreams of her children growing strong. A servant dreams of freedom. An enslaved man dreams of home far across the ocean. The city itself seems to dream too, resting between one day and the next, waiting for dawn to wake it again. At midnight, silence deepens. Even the taverns grow quieter. The streets are empty, lanterns burning low. The harbor lies still, its ships shadowy against the dark sky. The moonlight glows on rooftops and water. Stars scatter above, brilliant in a sky unclouded by city lights. The beauty of night is raw, pure, eternal. This is New York, at its most vulnerable and its most peaceful. 300 years ago, night in New York was a time of rest, of quiet, of whispers. There were no glowing towers, no endless noise, only lanterns, shadows, songs, and dreams. The city was small, but alive, fragile, but strong, quiet, but filled with hidden stories. So when you walk New York's streets at night today, surrounded by lights and noise, remember, once this was a city of darkness, silence, and stars. Take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. Tonight, we have walked through the streets of New York as it was 3 centuries ago. We have seen the muddy lanes and wooden houses, the bustling harbor and noisy taverns, the quiet firesides and hidden stories of ordinary people. Now, as our journey comes to an end, let us pause together. Let us reflect not only on what New York was, but on what it became, and on what its past can still teach us today. If you are from New York, share this story with your friends, because this is the root of your city. And if you are from another place, tell me in the comments, what do you see in the past of your own city, your own family, your own people? This chapter is not about work or food, not about politics or trade. It is about memory, meaning, and the quiet lessons hidden in the past. 300 years ago, New York was not the city we know now. It was a small colonial town, perched on the edge of an island, its future uncertain. Yet, within its narrow streets, the seeds of a great metropolis were already planted. The harbor brought goods from every corner of the world. The market square echoed with many languages. The taverns hummed with laughter, and the homes glowed with fires that warmed families through long winters. It was a place both fragile and resilient, vulnerable to storms, sickness, and hunger, yet stubbornly alive. The shape of the city was not only in its streets and buildings, but in its people. The sailors, merchants, servants, mothers, children, immigrants, and enslaved, each played a part, each left a mark. Together, they wove the fabric of a city that would one day grow taller, faster, brighter than they could ever imagine. Think for a moment about their lives. No electricity, no machines, no instant connection across oceans. Life was slower, harder, and yet, in many ways, simpler. A family gathered around a fire at night, sharing a single loaf of bread, found comfort in each other. A child, chasing a wooden hoop through the streets, laughed with the same joy a child might laugh today at a glowing screen. A sailor, gazing at the stars above the harbor, dreamed of home, as we still do. The lesson is this: progress may change our tools, but it does not change our humanity. The need for warmth, for food, for laughter, for love. These things remain. History often forgets the quiet voices, the poor, the enslaved, the women, the children. Their names are rarely in books, their deeds rarely celebrated, but without them, New York would not have survived. The servant who carried water at dawn, the mother who nursed her child through sickness, the sailor who risked storms to bring goods, the enslaved man whose hands built the city's walls. These lives mattered. They were not famous, but they were essential. When we remember them, even in whispers, we honor the truth of history. New York was never just a city by itself. It was a meeting place, a crossroads of cultures. Ships from Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean tied it to the world. Its people carried traditions, languages, and beliefs from every corner of the earth. That diversity, that mixture, was its strength. Even in hardship, even in conflict, it created something new. A city of many faces, many voices, many dreams. This too is a lesson. Greatness comes not from walls, but from connections. As our journey closes, imagine again the night in old New York. The lanterns flicker on wooden posts. The harbor lies quiet under the moon. Families sleep close together, their breathing soft, their dreams fragile. The city is small, its future uncertain, but in its silence lies promise. The promise of growth, of change, of survival. And now, 3 centuries later, that promise has been fulfilled. The city stands tall, alive with light and sound, known across the world. Yet beneath the glass towers and neon lights, the memory of the old city still lingers. Think of this as a conversation. You, lying now in your own home, listening, resting, and they, 300 years ago, sitting by a fire, telling stories to their children. The distance is great, but the connection is simple. Human hearts, human voices, human dreams. Across centuries, we are not strangers, but family, bound by the same need for love, for warmth, for hope. So as we end our walk through New York of the past, remember, history is not just facts and dates. It is life, lived one day at a time. It is laughter and sorrow, struggle and joy. It is the sound of hooves on muddy streets, the taste of bread fresh from an oven, the glow of a lantern against the dark. New York was built not in towers, but in moments, moments of courage, of work, of family, moments of survival and hope. And tonight, as you close your eyes, let those moments guide you into rest. Imagine the quiet streets, the flicker of lanterns, the sound of waves at the harbor. Let the voices of the past whisper you to sleep, because history is not only behind us, it is within us. And if we listen, it will carry us gently into tomorrow.